I think it is good to understand all the various motives in the U.S. side, because it's a big range. One is there is definitely a paranoid view in the U.S. that anything Chinese is a threat to U.S. security. So we shouldn't underestimate a group in the Congress, for example, of the U.S. that just takes the view, of course, this is the Chinese government spying on us and so on. So that's one real point, but not necessarily the only or even dominant point. The second is that a lot of our social media in the U.S. basically operate at the behest of the U.S. government, and TikTok does not. So one thing that really got the Congress annoyed was things on TikTok that the U.S. political elites didn't want the public to see.
Pro-Palestine?
For example, the pro-Palestine side. And one shouldn't underestimate that, because we know and we learn more that Meta and YouTube and others are so censored when it's and of course in America that's impossible, but it's real. So this is a second motivation. I'm sure that there is maybe some reciprocity. Well, China, you have to do this if we're going to do this kind of feeling.
You mean economically?
Yeah, economic or online or whatever.
And then said X is
business-wise, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's no doubt a real bargaining point. And then there is Donald Trump wants to make money. So yeah. we want to get in on this business. Yeah. This is very successful. He said apparently, well, this will be $1 trillion business if this is properly owned and operated. So never miss a chance for money. And so there's a lot of motives going on. We'll see how it plays out.
But the United States must be very cautious, because the Chinese Foreign Ministry has already made at least 2 statements in past week. One is that we should not allow any robbery of Chinese company. That's 2 words, robbery, yeah. The other is if it's a Chinese company, it should abide by Chinese laws, which means approval of the Chinese government for any selling of sensitive technology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Interesting times. I know you're pressed with time, but can I squeeze in another one about de-dollarization, renminbi internationalization, BRICS currency, which Trump said anybody gets on board with de-dollarization, I'm going to tax the hell out of you. What's going to happen in the financial world now? And where does Hong Kong sit in between the international finance world and mainland? We said before, there are not necessarily always on par, for example, with the EFTs and the cryptocurrencies. So maybe lumping all that together into a sort of like a foresight into the financial world in the near future.
Who do you want?
Oh, it's completely up to you, gentlemen.
I'll start, but you guys are the experts of what's going to happen here. My own view is that China should internationalize the renminbi because relying overwhelmingly on US dollar transactions is not sensible at this point. It's too risky. It is too much vulnerable to US official intervention and meddling. Russia had $300 billion of reserves seized just by a stroke of the pen, and I can tell you the mentality in Washington and in London and in Brussels is we take what we want and we steal it as we want. And they really act in that way. If I were the BRICS countries, I would say that's fine and good what the US wants to do, but there are many ways to settle an international transaction. And it doesn't have to be dollar-based through the SWIFT system. So my own prediction is that 10 years from now, we have a very different international settlement system in which the renminbi and perhaps some other currencies are playing a larger role.
But not crypto.
I don't think crypto is either. I don't see it having any value at all. And I see it having a negative value relative to central bank digital currencies. because a currency, yes, you could give a license to somebody to counterfeit money. Why do you give a license to someone to print money instead of the government? If you want monetary control, which I believe in, if you want a banking system that is stable with a central bank that stands behind it, why have crypto? Crypto is just an invitation, from my point of view, to trouble or arbitrary redistribution of wealth that makes no sense. And as someone who holds dollars, I don't love Bitcoin edging in and saying, well, we have $2 trillion of wealth. Well, where did you come from? Out of the blue. You didn't make anything. All you did was pump more CO2 into the atmosphere. You wasted a huge amount of computer time. You added nothing of value to the world real economy, nothing. So where did that wealth come from? Well, evidently it came from the rest of us. It added to inflationary pressures. It reduced monetary control. So I'm not a believer in crypto. I am a believer in digital currencies. That's quite different. That's a mechanism for payments. But then comes the role of the renminbi in particular. To my mind, China is the world's high-saving country, and that saving is good for development all over the world. China should be investing in the rest of the world. And to invest in the rest of the world means an outflow of capital to build factories or to buy sovereign debt or to invest in foreign private bonds and so forth. And that means the renminbi denominated assets. That means Hong Kong being the center, I think, for finance for outflows from China. Outflow is not a bad thing. It means China buys up a lot of productive assets in other places in the world, which is good for China and good for those places where China's investing. It's a win-win proposition. It's not a zero-sum proposition. So I would like to see China internationalize the renminbi. I'd like to see Hong Kong be not a dollar-based financial center, but a renminbi-based financial center to a large extent, and not just offshore renminbi, but an integrated financial system. And I believe, because China is so efficient in low-carbon energy systems and other things that the world needs, that investing through Belt and Road and other initiatives is really a wonderful win-win activity for China and the world. I want to see more of it. I want to see Hong Kong as the great financial center that intermediates all of that. And I don't believe that can or should be done in dollars. I think it should be done in renminbi to a very large extent.
Yeah, I think I very much agree with Professor Sachs there. Obviously, China had a big decision over the next decade or two because internationalization of renminbi and maintaining capital control are two things that you have to trade off. And so I think in the next 2 decades, the trade-off is something you can't really do internationalization of renminbi to its full extent without with capital control. But there are a lot of strategic benefit that China still think is important to China of maintaining a certain level of that. So let's assume that the current status of capital control or of free convertibility is not going to be happening right away in the foreseeable future. And Hong Kong's role is actually becoming extraordinarily important. Yeah. And Hong Kong could become that, let's call that currency triangle. That essentially is the 3 legs of that triangle. And so that we are able to find a way to internationalize renminbi as much as possible while living with capital control. So that triangle, the first leg, bring the world to Chinese capital inside China through the southbound, of Stock Connect, so that we can bring energy and resource large energy and resource companies, particularly sovereignly owned companies like Saudi Aramco and others, where the Chinese are the biggest customer of their energy and resources, and essentially bring them to Hong Kong and allow the Chinese domestic investors to invest through southbound without breaking capital control, but in large style, so that Chinese can become the customer. We are the customer of their energy, but if we can also be the equity holders of their energy player. So that's a natural hedge. You have rising crude prices, our customers suffers, but our shareholder benefit, and vice versa. Meanwhile, we buy that equity in renminbi, and then the sovereign of all those countries taking the renminbi, and what they can do is immediately buy into Chinese sovereign bond, so that they become China's creditors rather than us always become creditors of the West, particularly the US. So that big leg, bring the world to Hong Kong with Chinese money, not having to leave China. The second leg of that currency triangle is really bring the world to Hong Kong, or bring the capital, Chinese capital that is in Hong Kong, taking them to the world. Because today, China needs to, begin to invest in other countries, begin to move into other markets, begin to, export its manufacturing capacity and many other things to the world, going in different places so that it does not becoming, being held a hostage of the trade war. So I think going with Chinese players, creating an international expansion, but bring that capital market operation in renminbi in Hong Kong. The third leg of that triangle is to bring the real economy into the digital currency, not crypto, digital currency, into, what I'm doing is really a new exchange, is a cash flow driven exchange, but completely handled in a digital platform, so that we are able to bring finance from a PE multiple based future speculative sentiment driven market that drive everybody obsessive about sentiment into a cash flow, discounted cash flow driven, bring finance, bring Wall Street back to its basics. So through digitalization and essentially using revenue-based financing, RBF, rather than traditional equity and debt. And that will fundamentally change the way currency is deployed. And we do no longer have to rely on everybody believing in something. That's why stock trading higher. Rather than, if we can't see the future clearly, let's look at a much shorter future, which is really a limited window, discounted cash flow driven digital financing that really allow all sorts of little guys using little revenue streams as underlyings of financing financial transaction, so that we no longer have to only invest in stocks, which are only 40,000 companies in the world that are traded in the global exchanges. So essentially, hundreds of trillions of dollars are trading literally only tens of thousands of underlyings. And we are all looking at behind us. If there's a big line behind me buying the stock, I will buy 20 times.
So it's all
PE.
speculation.
It's all speculation. Yeah. Now we find nobody's behind me. That's why everybody's running out of the market.
Is that also Chinese wisdom in terms of how it materializes in the economic sense? That
I just add one example to support their views. That is, at this particular moment, Chinese companies are going abroad in largest, massive scale. So Hong Kong can play a very important role in providing legal and financial services. Having said that, I want to come to another point that to do with a view presented by your friend, former Greek financial minister Yanis. He said, because of this digital currency, payment system, and big data, etc., China and the United States now represent two approaches, very different, which may represent two different worlds in the future. He said one is represented by SWIFT, which is a highway full of holes, yet many people still using it, full of traffic. Another represented by Chinese payment system and Chinese digital currency, which is a super new highway, not very much used yet. Then came to this red note, Xiaohongshu, because red note is just one app Actually, TikTok, Temu, Shein, etc. are very popular in the United States, in many other countries. Behind this is Chinese technology, not only algorithm, but also in terms of how to organize production, supply chain, industrial chain, manufacturing power, and also other powers. In theory, this new TikTok refugees and what they represent may all shift to Chinese market, use Chinese currency. So let's do it digital way. It's one way to internationalize the Chinese currency, and then it's also another new way of payment as a way to get out of the current troubles, whatever.
And just to add to this, very much, a lot of the Chinese companies are using open source platforms, and much more than in the United States, where there's a lot of proprietary thinking. But China is building open source, and it's bringing more and more players from all over the world to this shared open source standard. And there will be a tipping point where you better be on that platform, because it's too narrow to be on a platform that is a proprietary platform. So I think China's bet on open source is a winning bet as well.
If we're ready to wrap up, and may I just get a final word from Professor Zhang Weiwei? Now, I'm a bit biased here because we've been working with him for the past over a decade, and no short of exaggeration, we literally created content that literally shaped a generation of how Chinese youth worldview is. So can I get a quick sum up from you about what is the sentiment on the ground with Chinese youth these days? Because this is the question we're getting from our international audience. And given the new red note craze, everybody is wondering, what do Chinese people think?
Yeah, this is a new generation, and it's a smartphone generation. And I would say, compared with the previous generations, born in 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, this Z generation is by far most self-confident generation. And so this is also the reason why when they have this communications, exchange of views in this red note with their American counterparts, they feel no barrier. They talk from their mind freely, and I think this is very good, very positive for China. And indeed, I had slight different views on this with Charles. That is, I mentioned why we should be a bit more self-confident. In a way, as I said, this the basketball player Yao Ming, of this height. I said, when China is already this high, this tall, you cannot hide yourself. If you look at CIA's whatever website, it's about Chinese economy, always purchasing power parity. The CIA, which said, number one economy for 1 decade. Yeah, so in their whatever strategic planning, that's why there's so much worry in Chinese beating us. Same with this latest ASPI report from Australia. We said out of the 64 critical technology, China is leading the United States in 57. And what's more important is, even a few years ago, it's only China led the United States perhaps in 5, 6, 7 areas. But this 50-something became reality in the last 5 years when the tech war and trade war started, since 2018, 2019. So that's why, when the trade war, tech war broke out, I made an open comment in China television. I said we should give an award to Donald Trump. He will allow us to develop much faster. It's nicknamed Nation Builder.
I want to make sure that I'm not disagreeing with, So essentially, I believe that you need to be strategically arrogant, but tactically humble.
Right.
That's what I do.
All you need to think, confidently. You need to act humbly. Or you need to believe in confidence, but you act in humbleness. Because once you get flipped this around, you're not going to win. But if you don't have the confidence, you're not going to win. But if you act, excessively confidently, you're not going to win. So I just think strategically arrogant, we absolutely believe in ourselves, but technically we act humbly because we don't want anybody else to take the wrong way. We want everybody to work with us rather than everybody getting alarmed and start to become obstacles.
Let me come out for humble, that we need mutual humility on all sides. The world's very complicated. We have a lot of hard work to do together to solve global problems. Arrogance is a huge threat. And one of my favorite books that I already knew 60 years ago was by Senator William Fulbright, who was the chairman of our Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he wrote a book called The Arrogance of Power. And he said, this is so self-destructive. So I don't think arrogance is anybody's friend. What we really need is a lot of cooperation. We need a lot of humility in the face of some very big global challenges. And we need a lot of friendship, which now is on Red Note and TikTok. And so fortunately, the people in the United States and China are making the connections. Maybe they will inspire the leaders to make the connections too.